Okay. So I think that we want to get an on-time start here, and we have critical mass. People may be joining us a little bit on the late side, but I just want to thank everybody for being here to have this very important conversation. I am Liz Benjamin from Marathon Strategies. I'm going to be just talking a little bit about logistics and then turning it over to the people that you really want to hear from. Um, I just want to let you know that we're going to keep this as tight as possible. And in the interest of time, we're not going to be doing a Q&A. That does not mean that if you have questions, we're not going to be answering them. All that we're going to ask is that, and we'll give you some more information about this at the end, but that if you want to speak more broadly with any of the people who are presenting today, or if you have questions, please address them to one of the communications folks, and we'll talk again about how to do that at the end here. And we will make sure that you are connected with whomever you need and get all of the data that you need, all the background you need, all of the explanation that you need, etc. Just because, in the interest of time, we're going to keep it as tight as we can. So I'm going to turn it over to Giselle Routhier from the Coalition for the Homeless, and she's going to kick things off for us and then turn it over to the next speaker. Giselle, thanks.
Sounds great. Thanks, Liz. My name is Giselle Routhier. I'm the Policy Director at Coalition for the Homeless. I'm going to share a few charts today about shelter census, and I'm going to talk a little bit about them before kicking it over to my colleagues. So to get it started, I think the big thing we wanted to talk about today was that in October 2020, the number of homeless single adults sleeping in the Department of Homeless Services shelter system, including safe havens, stabilization beds, and veterans beds, surpassed 20,000 for the first time ever. This milestone includes an all-time record 15,369 single men and a near record 4,841 single women, for a total of 20,210 people. I will note, since you may be noticing that these data are from October, because the city posts full census data on a 2-month lag, we fully expect this number to actually be higher now, given the trajectory in recent months and years. In the past year alone, the number of homeless single adults in shelters increased by 10%. In the past decade, the number of homeless single adults in shelters has more than doubled. I will also note that these data include only those sleeping in DHS shelters, not those on the streets or in systems run by other city agencies or private groups. So let's talk a little bit about some of the reasons. This crisis of epic proportions is a result of multiple economic and policy failings, including a severe lack of housing for single adults, and importantly, a lack of supportive housing for adults living with serious mental illness, substance use disorder, or other disabilities, which our partners are going to talk about in more detail. This dire homelessness crisis among single adults has been exacerbated by COVID-19, which has already forced more individuals into homelessness and will likely worsen in the coming months. COVID-19 has reminded us that housing is healthcare. Between March and August, the age-adjusted mortality rate due to COVID-19 for homeless New Yorkers in shelters was 78% higher than for the New York City general population. I'm going to turn it over to Laura now at the Supportive Housing Network of New York to talk more about the critical need for supportive housing.
Thank you, Giselle. My name is Laura Michoud, and I'm the Executive Director of the Supportive Housing Network of New York, which represents more than 220 nonprofits across New York State that build and run supportive housing. And I am here today to talk about the need to continue supportive housing development across the state. As many of you know, supportive housing is affordable housing linked to on-site support services that help the most vulnerable homeless individuals and families rebuild their lives and community. Nonprofits have been building and running supportive housing for more than 30 years, rehabilitating dilapidated buildings and developing beautiful new apartment buildings in every borough. In 2016, Governor Cuomo, recognizing the success of supportive housing in ending people's homelessness, announced the largest ever long-term commitment, pledging to build 20,000 units of supportive housing over 15 years. Not only was this the largest commitment of its kind in history, it was the first ever commitment to creating supportive housing outside of New York City, making New York and Governor Cuomo a national leader in addressing homelessness. That same year, the governor funded the first 5 years of the commitment, enabling 6,000 units of supportive housing to be built. And since making that announcement nearly 5 years ago exactly, the state is well on its way to funding those first 6,000 apartments. But the money has run out just when, as today's horrible numbers attest, we need it the most, especially for Black and Brown people who make up the majority of homeless New Yorkers. We are here today to ask the governor to fulfill his commitment by funding the remaining 14,000 units. We realize this may seem to be the precise worst time to look for a long-term funding commitment, given the pandemic's impact on the state's budget. But honestly, the governor and the legislature did not invest in supportive housing just because it's the morally right thing to do. They also did so because it's sound economics. Homelessness is expensive. Without stable housing, very vulnerable people cycle in and out of shelters, prisons, jails, and state psychiatric centers. Study after study shows that supportive housing actually saves the state money. And my colleague, Kristen, will speak to supportive housing and how it leverages billions in federal and private funding to help New Yorkers, while also creating jobs, affordable housing, and revitalizing communities hit hard by the pandemic. But supportive housing's greatest impact is on the lives of the people who live there. With that, I'd like to introduce Geraldine Sawyer, an Army veteran and tenant of Surf Vets House, a supportive housing residence in Brooklyn, to share her thoughts and experience of living in supportive housing. Geraldine, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for having me. My name is Geraldine Sawyer. I served in the United States Army from 86 to 87. Upon my release from the Army, because they didn't have the don't tell, don't ask at that time, I went through a lot of changes. So upon my release from the Army, it's sad to say that, I was just on the wrong road. And then most importantly, in 2016, when I came home, I came into the shelter system. I obtained my degree, and then Serve Vets Place came into my life. And since then, I've been stable with the job. I work for a shelter system now, as a matter of fact. But if we had more supportive housing like Serve Vets Place, a lot of people, it would change a lot of lives, like, the counseling and all the resources that they have here. Within here, we just need a lot of places like this. We have a gym, we have 24-hour counseling if you need, whenever you're in a crisis. And that's all I need to say. It has changed my life tremendously. And thank you for the supportive housing.
Thank you, Ms. Sawyer, for sharing your experience. I think it gives all of us inspiration to continue the work we do. So thank you very much. Appreciate your time. I'm Kieran Miller, and I am director of the Corporation for Supportive Housing, which is a nationwide intermediary for supportive housing. As the largest and longest mission-driven financer of supportive housing in New York, we know that housing is the solution to homelessness, and that housing is healthcare, just as my colleagues have been talking about. Experience has taught us that developers need a multi-year funding commitment in order to purchase land to build supportive housing. Absent clear ongoing funding from the state, supportive housing developers and investors will not be able to buy properties and secure construction financing needed to move forward. Why is this important? Developers cannot take the risk of buying land without a government funding plan. They need assurance that they will have access to money for building the apartments so they can provide home to New York's most vulnerable people. And the market proves this to be true. CSH, as an acquisition funder, saw a 70% decrease in loan requests when the last round of supportive housing funding ended in New York in 2016, providing only 4 loans in that year. Yet, when the funding of the first 6,000 of the 20,000 commitment was in place by the governor, CSH saw a yearly increase in lending demand. This culminated in 2020 alone, prior to COVID, where CSH was at a pace for a record 18 loans totaling $40 million, so that over 2,000 new apartments could be built from that round alone. The developers and investors are ready to go and buy and build. As Laura mentioned, supportive housing development is an economic driver. It is typically combined with affordable housing development, and new jobs are created in both construction and once the building is built. State and city funding leverages billions of dollars in private sector, local, and federal investment and creates beautiful new residents to improve neighborhoods. This is precisely the economic medicine New York needs as it works to recover from the pandemic-induced crisis. Supportive housing is the only option for many of the thousands of people residing in shelter today. Without it, people will not be able to leave shelter for a home, because for many, affordability is not enough. The accompanying services in supportive housing, as Ms. Sawyer was talking about, offer additional stability for people with complex needs, such as medical issues or histories of trauma. Without those supports, many people will sadly return to homelessness. As we are hearing today, the need for supportive housing is at an all-time high, given these record numbers of adults needing emergency shelter and the disparate impact of COVID-19 on the state's most vulnerable and marginalized people. Today, we are asking for the governor's leadership of addressing today's grim milestone by smartly fulfilling his commitment to fund supportive housing. This funding will keep the development pipeline going so that we can next hold a press conference at an opening of a new supportive housing building. Thank you very much to all my colleagues and all of you listening today. And now I turn it back to Liz.
Okay, so that we were actually we're very time efficient. And so I want to thank you all for being here. I think that the numbers really speak for themselves. It's a very disappointing and unfortunate situation that we find ourselves in, but also, as you've heard from the speakers today, there is a pretty potent and powerful tool that the governor can use, and it will be part of the solution, not a silver bullet, just to be clear, but certainly something very important that we are looking for a commitment on at this difficult time. So in other words, this is going to bring the formal portion of this particular press conference to a close. We are super efficient. And if you have questions, at the bottom of the release that you're going to receive regarding this particular event, you're going to get some press contacts. That would be myself and also my colleague, Robert Montano, from Marathon, and Pakelity will be there as well. I believe Berlin Rosen will be your contact for the Coalition for the Homeless. Anyone that you want to connect here who has spoken, any questions that you might have, the data that Giselle shared is available. If I'm not mistaken, Giselle, right? We can share that with reporters. If you're interested in seeing those graphs or using them as visuals, please do contact us and we will make sure that you have everything that you need. Again, we're interested in answering all your questions, just want to keep things in the interest of time moving here. And I want to thank everybody for being with us, and have a great day.